2,300 years of Western thought on this in 1 hour. This tradition reaches back all the way to the Greeks in Western thought. Aristotle, Socrates, and Plato, who first thought about this, and then goes on to René Descartes, who's really the modern founder of the study of the mind and the brain, of consciousness. To Charles Darwin and Alan Turing, Albert Einstein, to my own mentor and teacher, Francis Crick. And this tradition has emphasized the empirical and the mathematical. So it uses mathematical logic as well as analysis and the empirical investigation. And so by and large, it's a physicalist, or it is a physicalist way of viewing the universe. So we try to explain everything we can using physics, using energy, space, time, matter. And maybe if we now come to the problem of consciousness, that has not really been the focus of empirical investigation until 20 years ago, maybe we have to enlarge our view of what physical reality entails. But it's this tradition that stresses the empirical querying of nature. You can think about things, but ultimately you have to test them against reality. And your theories, including theories of consciousness, have to be testable. Otherwise, they're not scientific theories. So that's what this approach focuses on. So so I think we should look on this. That screen is dead. On this screen, that's dead, and this one is it's sort of basically dead. So we just focus on this screen. This really epitomizes the problem of consciousness. What you see is red, and all of us see red. And if you're colorblind, you may see red that's slightly different depending on your exact eyes, the exact molecular constitution of your photopigment in your eye. You might see different, but you see something. And philosophers refer to this as it feels like something to see red. Above and beyond the photon that strikes my eye, that evokes electrical activity somewhere in my brain, there's this feeling associated with it, an experience, a subjective, phenomenal experience. And philosophers refer to this as qualia. So here's a qualia of red. And if I have a toothache, there's a qualia of having a bad tooth. And if I remember my mother, then I have a qualia of remembering my mother and all the positive feelings that go ahead with that. Now, the belief of many, in particular the belief of my mentor, Francis Crick, was that once we understand consciousness in this very simple form, just red or blue or smell, we will have understood the problem of consciousness in general. That all the different aspects of consciousness, including self-consciousness, so the fact that I know I'm a man, I know that I'm angry, or I might be angry, or I might remember what I had this morning for breakfast, that all those different aspects are just higher elaborations upon a basic phenomena of experience. So the problem that we face as scientists is best shown here. So this is my brain. It's an egghead. I'm an egghead, a nerd, and we have elongated brain. So this is my brain in a magnetic scanner. And what I superimpose, it's difficult to see. Well, you can see it nicely on the side pictures. Is the activity, the imagined activity in my brain if I would see red. So I put those those red pixels in there, and they correspond to a part of my brain that would be uniquely active if I see red. Now, in a different part of my brain would be active.
That you mentioned that this is your brain, but then you have written down their third person as it's someone else's account.
Well, so everybody here is looking at my brain from a third person. Okay, so I am a first person. I have an experience. Now, all of you can't see my experience, but you can look at my brain. And you can take a piece of my brain and you can analyze it. You can do biochemistry, and you can put microelectrodes into my brain, as you can do sometimes with patients, and study them. Or you could put EEG, like Richie and his students, you could put EEG on my brain. So all of that is a third-person account, but only I have a first-person account. And the challenge for Western science so far has been to explain how does the first-person account come about. That's the mystery. This is what we call the heart of the mind-body problem. How can physical matter, so my brain is physical matter, is subject to all the laws of quantum mechanics and relativity that we heard about. But nowhere in quantum mechanics or in relativity does it say consciousness. In none of the equation is there consciousness. If I look at the periodic table that you showed, there's nothing there about consciousness. If I look at chemistry, or I look at in my genes, the ATGC, the letters, the nucleotides in my genes, there's nothing consciousness. Yet I wake up each morning into a world that's filled with feelings. And it's not at all clear how feelings come into a physical system. This is the deep mystery. And why other system, this is also a physical system. This one here, it consists also of matter, different than this, but it's also matter, and we don't believe that this thing has feelings. It doesn't feel like anything to be an AM radio. And so the big question is, why does it not feel like something to be a radio, but it feels like something to be a brain, sometimes at least. Not in deep sleep. In deep sleep, as far as I'm concerned, I have nothing. Now, I don't feel anything, just nothing. But when I awake, either in my dream, when I dream, or right now, I have feelings. And some philosophers call this the explanatory gap. On the one world is the world of physics and chemistry and biology and brains. On the other world is my world of pains and pleasures and feelings and yearnings and memories. And we know those are linked. We'll talk about that. We know that the world of the brain is intimately linked with the world of the experience. But why and how that is, that has been the big mystery. How the first-person account relates to the third-person account. And what makes this much more difficult than studying stars, studying viruses, or studying quantum mechanics, that we believe those things don't have a first-person account. A star, we believe, doesn't feel like something to have a star, to be a star, or to be a virus, or to be an electron, yet it feels like something to be a brain. All right, so we've often heard about this scientist, this 16th century Italian scientist.
Yeah.
So we've heard often about this scientist, one of the fathers of modern science, and the motto that we also use today is, if we can't make something measurable, then we have to make things measurable. So if we study consciousness, we have to develop tools to make them measurable. That's sort of our mantra, or maybe I shouldn't use it, our motto. Well, this is very... So in medicine, in Western medicine and science, we distinguish two different usages of the word consciousness. One is the content of consciousness, and the other one is sort of states of consciousness or levels of consciousness. So we were talking about the state of consciousness, red. When I see red, my consciousness is filled with red. Or I can have a memory, or I'm hungry, or I have my toe hurts. Those are all different states of consciousness. And we're trying to understand how do they relate to brain states. But then there's also this other thing, level or states of consciousness. Right now, we're all wide awake. Nobody's asleep, and we are conscious. And tonight, we close our eyes, and we go into different states. In fact, we may wake up inside our sleep, and then we have another state of consciousness, namely the dream state. Or then we can go into deep sleep, non-REM sleep, where we believe there's very little consciousness. And this happens every day, 24 hours. Or there's also pathological forms of states of consciousness. So this is a very famous patient, Terri Schiavo. So she had her heart stood still for 20 minutes, and then she was rescued from the brink of death by the doctors. And then she lived for another 15 years. And she was alive. She had, her eyes are open, and then they're closed.
15 years? 15, 1-5.
15 years, yes.
Some
Some of these patients can be alive for as long as 2 decades. So these patients are called vegetative state.
So according to medical sort of...
No, they're alive because their eyes open, close. But they have no, as far as we can tell, this is now more controversial, it doesn't feel like anything to be them. So her, for example, in her case, the EEG was flat. the EG. It was flat, irregular. And this is her brain at the right side at postmortem. It had shrunk by about half. Now, there are many of these patients. In the United States, they probably estimate between 15 and 20,000 of patients like this that are alive. They have periods when they open their eyes and periods when they close. Sometimes they may, they groan or they move, or sometimes they move their eyes. Sometimes it looks like they're smiling, like there. But there's no way to communicate with them. You can ask the patient, for example, move your eyes if you're in pain, or hold my hand, or something. And there's no way to reliably communicate. So we think many, if not all of them, it doesn't feel like anything. The consciousness is gone. Yet there's still enough brain activity left to sustain breathing or to sustain brain reflexes so that she can move and sometimes, groan. So it's important to distinguish the content of consciousness from the levels of consciousness. And the levels of consciousness, we know quite a bit about the brain mechanism. Your brain has to be excited enough in order for the nerve cells in the cortex proper, the cortex and the thalamus to fire in order for you to be conscious of something like pain or pleasure or red or green or smell. So what is it? So I tried, there are many, many speculations in the West on consciousness, many. And I've tried to distill out the facts that we're pretty certain we can say, where we're very confident about these facts. So we know that consciousness is associated with some complex biological networks, in particular brains, in particular human brains. Now, it's not associated with all biological networks. For instance, we all have an immune system. We have several immune systems, an innate one and an acquired one. I'm here in a new environment here in Mungard, and there are viruses around and bacteria, and my body might be busy fighting off those viruses and bacteria. Yet I don't feel anything. I have no feelings in my immune system. So my immune system is working without there being any consciousness. Why? It's a very interesting question that people rarely ask. Why is my immune system not conscious? We don't know. There are, I mentioned this yesterday, my liver, very complex, very complicated metabolic networks. It's not conscious. There are 100 million neurons here in my gut. They don't seem to be conscious. So it's only some particular type of biological networks that seem to be associated, we think, with conscious activity. And the question is why? The immune system...
No.
I do not want to interfere your presentation.
Interrupt.
But since many years, I think most subtle level particle, particle of plant, rocks, brain, same or differences?
At the subtle level, it's probably, yeah.
Panpsychism? Is this what
No.
as
His Holiness is, from a purely physical theory point of view, at the subtlemost level, can one say that the material constitutions, the constitutive elements at the fundamental level, is the same between inorganic matters like rocks on the one hand and plants and life on the other?
Yes.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yes.
Now, obviously, when you say life start much earlier than the consciousness or mind.
Yes.
So the particle, the continuation of our brains sort of particle, it is called a continuation. Ultimately, this is related with those particles which no mind or no consciousness, no feeling. So the most subtle level, no differences. Now, what level? The so-called consciousness, to see, what level can act as a basis of consciousness. Can you make distinction? Plant, no consciousness because such things is lacking.
Lacking.
We, living being, have that kind of sort of particle, so have the ability to develop consciousness. Can you say something?
Christoph.
We can speculate, but the answer is right now no. Now some people, well, let me come back to that. Right now we don't know. We can say my liver is not conscious. My brain is conscious some of the time. That we would say is a fact. Why? We don't know really. We can speculate on it, but we don't really know. We think it has to do with the complexity. And so we think complex system defined in a particular way, the more complex you are, the more there is potential for consciousness. A simple system has maybe little consciousness. A more complex system has more complex consciousness. So this would be like an emergent phenomena. But this is right now speculation. We don't know for sure.
consciousness
I mean, there is an ancient, there's an ancient, let me come back to that in a second. We know that consciousness does not require behavior. We know this from patients who are catatonic, or we know this from some patients who've taken a tainted form of heroin, and then they become completely frozen. They can't move at all anymore at Stanford, frozen addicts, yet they're still conscious. We also know this ourselves in our dream state, because our brain, in an attempt to, when you're dreaming and you're running and flying, and if you live in a high-rise in America, that's not good if you act out your dream, because you would jump out of the window. So what the brain does, while it sleeps, it partially paralyzes the body. It's called an atonia, and almost all the big muscles are paralyzed except the eye movements. So the eyes you can move, but everything else is paralyzed while you're dreaming. So that tells us that you can be conscious without having behavior.
Why eye movement, Kashori?
So why the eye movement? That's a kind of an activity.
We don't know. We don't know. It's a good question. The eyes are there. Maybe for other people to read out, we don't know. We know from patients, we heard them, I think Tanya was talking about it, or maybe Richie, some patients who have lost due to an explode, let's say soldiers who come back from, veterans who come back from Iraq, due to bomb, they have lost part of their brain that mediates emotions. So they have no affect, they're very flat, their voice, it's not modulated, there's no emotion, yet they're conscious, they can tell you about pain and pleasure. So we know, at least in these pathological cases, that you can be conscious, you can have experiences without having strong emotions. We know, this is more recent, much more recent, but we know that, so yesterday you distinguished different forms of attention, that at least the pointed attention, when I attend to something, when I look at you, but I attend to, on the corner of the eye to His Holiness, that this form of attention can be separate from consciousness. So you can attend to something. So there's many experiments now where people, I'll show one where you can attend, I'll show one this afternoon, where you attend to something without seeing it. So it's invisible, you don't see it, you're not conscious of it, yet you can still attend to it. We believe that you don't need language, and nor do you need self-consciousness to be conscious.
Self-consciousness.
Can you explain what you mean by self-consciousness?
Well, I know that I'm Christoph, and I can have a higher order thought. I can say, I'm now having a conscious experience. I'm now talking to His Holiness.
So the point you're making is animals don't have self-consciousness? Is that the point you're making?
Well, one consequence is most animals have very little self-consciousness, but a dog is conscious of joys and pleasure and pain without having a lot of self-consciousness. The dog doesn't sit there and say, my tail wags in a funny way. My dog just is in the present and doesn't have a lot of self-consciousness. It might have some very little thing. So So I think self-consciousness is just an evolutionary elaboration of consciousness reflecting upon itself, matter becoming conscious and then reflecting upon itself.
Had this discussion about whether the presence of self-regulation in animal, whether one can speak of it, and His Holiness gave the example of animals who have a certain experience in the past and now act cautiously, although they want to eat something. Isn't that
So sensory level want something, very, very eager. But mental level, remember, some sort of past also experience. So cautious.
Cautious.
Sensory.
So that's not a purely sensory process.
No,
Yes,
no, you're correct. It's memory, but it doesn't have to be an explicit memory. You can.
That is difficulty and self-consciousness.
That Quran and self. So you are suggesting that that's not a self-conscious.
No, you can
activity.
condition people so people can be fearful of something without knowing quite why. You go in a dark room and you feel very uneasy, but you don't know why. You may not have an explicit conscious memory. You can condition people without them being conscious of what they're being conditioned. So that's different from self-consciousness.
I think this is like dog. It's some food, which you see they feel some kind of they cautious. Then someone, a person, the dogs have it's a very good sort of relations. Then that same sort of food, take that person and give, I think may accept.
So imagine a situation where there is dog sees the food, but it's very cautious, it's not approaching. Then
so they have some sort of the capacity, still not very sure. Then someone, the dog, fully trusted, pick up that food and give. I think since you see the dog trusted that person, so may take.
But that doesn't require self-consciousness. That can be accomplished without self-consciousness.
You can have the situation of a patient who has been, let's say, mugged, who has been robbed at gunpoint in a dark parking garage. It may well be some of these patients now, or people.
I don't want to take too much time, but just about, since we're talking about animals, I just want to say something a little bit better than the dog and punishment. There's a story with dolphins that were trained to clean the pool in which they were. So to train them, they would give them a fish as a reward for bringing a piece of cardboard that was down. So they found that each piece of cardboard bring one fish. So one dolphin, he delayed gratification by hiding the cardboard under a rock and breaking it into 3-4 pieces, and he will bring each piece to get a fish. So first he had to delay gratification, and he had to realize that if he was breaking one into 4, he will get 4 fish. So that seems to be quite a lot of self-reflection. And then the other dolphins start to do the same.
So there's no question animals are very complex. And some animals do have some forms of self-consciousness. But that's different from saying you must be self-conscious in order to be conscious. Right? So here the claim is you can be conscious of something like red without necessarily being conscious of I am Christoph Koch having a conscious experience of red. We know from experiments done at my university.
Maybe we move on to the next point.
Sorry.
No.
And so Richie reminded me there is one totally separate memory system that works without consciousness at all. It's called procedural. There's one very famous patient called HM who lost a part of his brain, the hippocampus, and for his remaining 30 years of his life could not remember any specific episode. So you met him, you talked to him, you said, how do you do, how are you, he said, fine, you walk out, you come back in, again, he has no memory of it. You can do this 10 times, he does no memory. Yet he can learn certain things, like he can learn to write in a mirror. You know, you can train yourself. Leonardo da Vinci did this, that you write like you write in a mirror. So he could learn that. He could learn certain other motor procedure, complex sequences of motor activity, yet he had no idea that he'd learned that. Yet his brain performed better and better. And so we call this procedural memory. How to bike, how to play tennis, you know, how to sit in a particular pose. Those things, it turns out, you can learn fully without being conscious of having learned them. But that's different from remembering specific episodes in our life. That's episodic memory versus procedural memory.
And that includes learning emotional forces.
Long-term memory. True. Consciousness can occur in one
hemisphere. So these are experiments in which
yes.
People cut, you know, surgically, and you only have half a
That's
brain, and patient can still be consciousness. And you don't need memory, as we talked, long-term memory, in order to be conscious. Now, most interesting from a brain science point of view, if you lose specific parts of your brain, not your heart, not your liver, not your kidney, but you lose specific parts of your cerebral cortex, you lose specific content of consciousness. So you might not be able to see color, you might not be able to see motion, you might not be able to recognize your spouse of 30 years because you've lost the feeling of familiarity. Those things, feeling of familiarity, seeing reds, those are all coded in particular parts of the brain. So this part of the brain seems to be closely involved in color perception, this one in memory, in conscious feeling of familiarity.
These two software memory.
So those cannot be restored once.
We really don't know the extent to which they can.
Yes, extent.
If it occurs early in life, if it occurs earlier in life, it's much more likely to be able to be restored.
Now, we come to consciousness in animals. So this is two conscious mammals. One is my daughter, okay, and the other one is her dog, a German Shepherd, her beloved dog, Tosca. So why do we think that both are conscious? Well, most importantly for me as a brain scientist, if I look at the brains of Homo sapiens and of Canis family, if I look at the dog brain and the human brain, a little bit of brain, you know, if I take a little piece of brain tissue like a grain of rice and look at a human brain, a mouse brain, a monkey brain, it looks all very similar. The neurons look the same, the synapses look the same, the genes overall are similar. Nothing is exactly the same, but they're all very, very similar. The big difference is our brain is roughly 1,000 times bigger than the brain of a mouse. It's 20 times bigger than the brain of a dog. But of course, dolphin brains, you mentioned dolphins, are bigger, and blue whale has a brain 3 times as big as a human, which is a little bit embarrassing for us neuroscientists, because we think we're on top, and so to explain why the whale brain, actually, although it's bigger, it's not as clever as we are, is not easy. So at the level of mechanism, it seems to be very similar, and the main thing that differs is size. And so this is a very powerful argument for why we think, I mean, if the brain is so similar, why should only one species, humans, have consciousness, but not other species? The second reason is behavior. Dogs behave, they're not like us, they don't talk, but a baby doesn't talk, right? A very young baby doesn't talk, and a patient who has a stroke doesn't talk, but we think they're both conscious. And dogs have a variety of ways to communicate their internal emotions to us. They wag their tail, they move their eyes, they move their snout, they can bark, they have different kinds of bark. So there are many ways we can communicate with these guys, which is why we love them. And so it's strange, and it's always, so I grew up as a Catholic, and even as a young boy, I always asked my father and the priest, I said, I don't understand, why is dog not going to, if my dog died, and I said, my dog is going to paradise, surely, right? I'm going to meet my dog up in paradise. I said, well, no, actually not. Paradise is only for humans. And
그래서 더유.
And I've always found that strange, because whatever we are, we're all nature's children. And we're so similar. We evolved from each other. We're not the same, but we're all very similar. So, which we see every day in the laboratory, how you see how animals are related at all levels. So I think this is not a very difficult argument for biologists in the West. It's a much more difficult argument to get across in the West, the general public, because we believe in human exceptionalism in the Christian Judean tradition, and many still believe that we have a soul and that those guys don't have a soul. And René Descartes was very explicit. He said if you hit a dog with your carriage and it yelps, it reacts, it has a reflex, but the dog does not suffer pain. He wrote this very explicitly.
Yeah, John presented that, yeah. John showed the machine. Yeah.
Now, the question is, what about other animals that are not mammals, like dogs or cats? What about a bee? Okay, this is the bee. They're all female, most of them, almost all of them. They're very industrious. They can dance. They can recognize individual faces. They have a very complex way to communicate. They can find, they have very complex behavior where within 3 days they can find a new house. Humans takes a year in discussion with your spouse and lots of fights to find a house. But bees, 300 scouts can find a house without fighting. They do this dance. For 3 days they dance and then they pick a new home. And this is the brain of a bee. So a bee is much smaller. A bee has only 1 million neurons. We have roughly 100 billion, 100,000 times more. But it's very complex. This is the visual, they see very well. And the complexity of the brain is, in fact, 10 times more complicated circuitry than the average mammalian brain. It's very complex. They have complex behavior, they have complex brain. So I would say we are not sure whether it doesn't feel like something to be a bee. And maybe when a bee goes, to the flower and gets the golden nectar, maybe it feels like something to be a bee. Maybe it feels a little bit of happiness. So in the warm sun, it experiences too its moment of conscious sensation. Now, we don't know this right now, and we don't find it. People have thought actually about tests of consciousness at the level of bees and flies. So this raises a question, what we in the West known as panpsychism. That maybe, and this is pure speculation at this point, maybe any biological creature that has a brain is conscious, like a worm or fly. We don't know right now. We simply do not know. Most people say, oh no, it's a bug, it can't be conscious. But that's just an intuition. Also, like most people think a whale is not a whale is a fish, right? A whale swims in the water and smells like a fish, so it's a fish. But we know a whale is a mammal. It's not a fish. So maybe these guys are conscious. It's something that people begin to think about, scientists begin to think about now. So what do people do today in the laboratories who study consciousness? They're looking right now for the correlates of consciousness in the brain. So you look, so you have an experience of red. So you try to ask a question experimentally with scanners, like Tanya and Richie showed, with magnetic scanners or with microelectrodes in humans and in monkeys that are trained, in monkeys that are trained to pull levers, which part of the brain is involved in giving rise to the color red. And we're looking for mechanisms. And for example, Tanya's father, who's also a very famous neuroscientist, Wolf Singer, believes that I believe you've met him.
Yes.
believe that synchrony, oscillation, the fact that neurons fire together is critically involved, is one of the correlates of consciousness. And it's controversial. There are many different ideas right now, but that's what people do in the lab. That there's real scientific progress, that rather just philosophers sitting around and talking about consciousness, we can now go in the lab and test and disagree and have vigorous empirical debates about which part of the brain is more important for consciousness. For instance, we know that there's this little brain, the cerebellum, at the back of my brain, which contains most of the neurons in the brain are contained in this little brain. Now, if you lose this little brain because you have a stroke or a tumor there, you're going to talk very funny. You get ataxia, you walk like you're drunk. You can't dance, you can't climb, you can't do coordinated motor activity anymore. Yet people, by and large, do not complain about loss of consciousness. They don't say, oh, suddenly I don't see the world in color anymore, or I have no more experience of emotion. So for instance, we have to understand why is this part of the brain not involved in consciousness, but this part is. So this is where most of the empirical research takes place today. So this raises the belief that most, I would say all physicalists have, that ultimately you need a brain, or if we are more general, you need some mechanism. There has to be some physical substrate necessary for consciousness to occur. We cannot conceive right now how in the absence of a brain, in absence of a brain, or maybe a physical mechanism, you can get consciousness. I mean, for us, we think that's invalid. We think that cannot happen. If you have no brain, or if your brain is dead, if your brain is totally shut down electrically, no more electrical activity, we think then you cannot have consciousness. No brain, never mind. Now, I understand in the Buddhist tradition that that's slightly different. And I guess you'll specifically talk to this point. And so maybe we should just leave it until you come. No brain, never mind. Now, I have 2 more slides. I wanted to come to an important, so in Western tradition, we'd like to look at a phenomenon like consciousness and then generalize it. In a sense, in 10 years or 50 years or 100 years, we will understand the correlates of consciousness. We will know whenever you're conscious of a pain or blue, you have some neurons, let's say, that oscillate in this part of the brain that do something. Right? So we've just like we found the neural correlates of illness or the neural correlates of bacterial infection, it's bacteria, we will find the correlates of consciousness in the human brain. We will. The only question is how long will it take us and how complicated will it be? Is it going to involve the entire body? Is it going to involve, the autonomic nervous system? But ultimately, we will know the answer that whenever the brain is in this state, whenever these neurons fire, let's say at 40 hertz, you will be conscious. But then you can step back and say, well, all right, it's fine, but why 40 hertz? Why not 30 oscillations per second? And so ultimately, we want to understand why brain, why not my liver? I want to understand what is special about this that this doesn't have. And ultimately, in the West, we care a lot about machines. We love machines, we build them. I'm a professor of engineering. Ultimately, we want to ask, is it possible that in the future, this thing can be conscious, that it may feel like something to be an iPhone, probably a very glorious feeling. Or the internet. So if you look at the computer today, the internet as a whole, it begins to rival the complexity of the human brain, just in terms of transistors and the wiring. And so it's a legitimate question to ask, well, in principle, could the internet be conscious? Could it what we mean by that, could it feel like something to be the internet? And when you turn the internet off, it doesn't feel like anything anymore. Is this possible? People say, well, that's science fiction. Well, but technology expands very, very rapidly, and we will experience in 10, 20, 30 years creatures, robots that will talk to us and interact with us. And so at some point, their brains, their computer chips will be so complex that it raises a legitimate question, is it conscious? And so to answer all those questions, we need a theory of consciousness. And scholars are now beginning to be, there's this one gentleman here Giulio Tononi, he's a colleague of Ricci, who's one of a number of scholars who now begin to think in a very quantitative mathematical way. He defines an equation, I'm not going to explain it, but essentially he says that consciousness doesn't depend, that you can have consciousness in a brain or you can have consciousness in a computer brain. If I take my brain and replace each of my neurons with a computer chip, this computer, Christoph, could also be conscious. It doesn't depend on the fact that it's nerve cells and muscles and axons. You could also do it out of copper wires and silicon transistors. And so we're beginning to try to understand what are the principal mathematical, logical, empirical conditions to be met for any system to be conscious, whether it's a human brain or whether it's a fetus or whether it's the internet. And this will allow us, these sorts of theories, at least in principle, will begin to allow us to measure consciousness, to build a conscious-o-meter, a consciousness meter, that we can test in patients like this. So this is a patient like Terry Schiavo. I want to test, does this patient have consciousness right now, but is unable to communicate because of brain injury?
This is a brain dead patient, yeah?
Yeah, this is one of these patients. I want to know, the patient is alive. Is the patient really experienced something, but cannot tell me because she can't talk? And this theory should tell us, is this guy, this is a worm, this is the best studied biological creature on the planet, a worm. Is this guy conscious? Mice, most people study mice in laboratories. It's a bee conscious. This is a human brain, but then what about little robots or future iPhones, or this is a depiction of the internet, which is now as complex as a human brain. And so I wanted it to end with this, that we're now beginning to construct theories that tell us what is really the necessary and sufficient requirement for any system to be conscious. A human brain, an animal brain, a fetus, a patient, all of those cases.